How's everybody doing? Super excited to be at DragonCon, super excited to not be in traffic right now or work. I assume everybody in here is a fan of Lord of the Rings, yes? Okay. All right, so real quickly, we're just going to go back through the history really quickly. These books were originally published in 1954, and they were written in stages actually between 1937 and 1949, so that was kind of a long process.
You know, Melinda, these are the books that were on the shelf at my house growing up, and this is the first time I've seen these in years, so they brought back a huge load of memories.
Dad used to read this to me as I was going to bed. There have been 3 film adaptations of Lord of the Rings. The first is the one we're primarily talking about today, which was the Bakshi Lord of the Rings that came out in 1978. There was The Return of the King by Rankin Bass in 1980, and then of course we all know Peter Jackson's movies that came out in 2001 to 2003. There were also a couple of small screen productions. These aren't the only ones, but they all kind of look like they were filmed in a church basement somewhere.
I was about to say, I feel like you found some of the Christmas plays I was in back in the 80s.
The top one is a Swedish live-action television film called Sagan om ringen, or something like that. And the other one is a Finnish live-action television miniseries called Hobbitit, which came out in 1993. I guess those Scandinavian folks just really love their Lord of the Rings, so God bless them. We can't really talk about the animated Tolkien movies without talking about the one we all probably remember really well, which is The Hobbit, which came out in 1977. It was an American animated musical television special created by Rankin Bass. And it was first broadcast on NBC in November of 1977. You know, Rankin Bass did all of those great Christmas specials we all remember, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and all that fun stuff. So this was their foray into animation. Now, they outsourced all of their stuff into Japan to do a lot of this, which we'll talk about in a moment. But their main thing that they wanted to do was produce a lot of these storybooks and song recordings for children that they could sell, because back in the 70s, they were not allowed to make toys to accompany animated productions. That didn't happen until Reagan came along and deregulated cartoons and stuff. So they had to sell other things to kids to make it a profitable venture for them. So they got some of the artwork from a guy who had done some drawings in Children's Digest. Rankin and Bass was a 2-man production here in the States. So it was really Rankin and Bass, and that was it. So the animation had to occur elsewhere, but the designs actually did come from the main guys, Arthur Rankin in particular. And so he really liked this drawing, and this is what the drawings inside look like, and we can see how that influenced The Hobbit. He also really liked a guy called Arthur Rackham, who did a lot of children's fairy tale animation and things like that. But when they sent everything over to Japan to animate, they worked with a company called Topcraft, which you'll probably remember did things like Flight of the Dragon and The Last Unicorn. So they had a very specific style that's very associated with Rankin Bass. This sort of shows you what I'm talking about in terms of the Japanese animation that was being used. And this particular production was a $3 million production that they did. So it was the most expensive animated television show up to that time. So in 1978, Ralph Bakshi, he is the bearded gentleman, he with the dark hair. Take your pick. The white-haired guy is Saul Zaentz, and he actually bought the rights to Lord of the Rings in the 70s and continued to hold them, and his estate holds them to this day. Peter Jackson had to get the rights from him to make his Lord of the Rings movie. Anyway, he was working, United Artists previously had gotten the rights to Lord of the Rings, and so they were the ones that Bakshi had to get the rights from in order to start making his movie. Now, I want to note that before we start going into this movie, which is, I don't know, how many people in this room have seen the Bakshi Lord of the Rings? Wow, lots of you. Okay, so you know how kind of weird it is, and I don't want it to seem like we're totally dogging it out, but there's some funny things about it, but I do want to point out that this guy had his own production studio here in America, and he had animators working here in America, and so he was kind of working with a lot less staff than Rankin Bass. So, you know, he had to fill, like, plus his movie is a lot longer, and it was a film. It wasn't just a thing for TV. So some of the choices that were made were kind of weird, but it was because he had a lot of limitations put on him.
And I just want to point one thing out. How many of us in the room saw this in the 80s on video cassette as kids? Like, I saw this in the 80s as a rental. You got to remember that back then there was no Peter Jackson. There was the animated Hobbit, and then there were these books that most of us were too young to effectively read. And so we saw this animated movie sitting in rental stores, and we thought, let's watch this. And so there was no context of a different way of doing it. So it was the animated Lord of the Rings for its time. And it actually, when I watched it as a child, I did think it was rather surreal and sort of above my head at times. And it kept me understanding that these books are going to be adult books to read.
Right.
I don't mean adult in that way. I mean, like, you just got to be older to understand.
I don't know. Bakshi was in charge. I watched this after I read the books, and it was really clear to me how much Bakshi loved The Lord of the Rings, because there were so many little details. There were funny things, but next to them were these details that you would not expect to be right.
Yeah, so like you're saying, Bakshi really wanted the movie to be geared toward adults, and he wanted it to be a full-length film. Although people have had mixed reactions to this movie, they made this movie for $4 million, and it made $30 million at the box office. So it was a very successful film, and it was nominated for both a Hugo and a Saturn Award, and the score was actually nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Original Motion Picture Score.
Yeah, Leonard Rosenman did the score for this movie. You probably know him best as the guy that did the music for Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, the one with the whales. And his
So he used a lot of whale songs.
No, but his style of composing is very it's very brassy, it's very light, and it has a lot of marchiness to it. I feel like when we were watching Lord of the Rings before this panel to research, when we were listening to the score during the film, I thought, wow, he must have very much been inspired by the scores of the 60s, like Elmer Bernstein, because what I was hearing was The Great Escape.
So like I said, in order to save money, they relied on a lot of animation, but they also used rotoscoping, and sometimes they did just plain silhouetted images with filtered backgrounds. And it's unfortunate that they decided to start the movie with the cheapest one of those, which is the filters and silhouettes moving around. So they used the same tactic that Peter Jackson ended up using, which is sort of a recap of everything to sort of set the stage, because there's a lot of information that we all have to know in order to go into the Lord of the Rings. So this is the first scene of the movie, and it looks like a guy in a Bozo the Clown hat running around in a community theater production.
Yeah, it's like, we're going to go see Lord of the Rings at our local theater in Schenectady, New York.
You know, when I was going through watching this movie, one of the things that jumped out to me, I really did like some of the animation techniques that they used, but because they used live actors to do some of these shots and they rotoscoped or drew over them, they seem to do a lot of extra acting. So, you know, we get a lot of hands on hips and
a lot of gesturing. Head. Yeah, they're always in motion. They're never quite still.
And I couldn't stop acting like Gandalf for 3 days when I was talking to people.
It's very clear to a lot of people who've watched these movies, or this movie, that Peter Jackson was very inspired by Bakshi, and he has even stated that, as particularly this scene, that he was sort of making a nod to the Bakshi movie. Bakshi himself, I don't know how many of you have heard about this, but
It's about to get real.
Bakshi had some mixed feelings about the Peter Jackson films. He says or at least when he was interviewed about it, he had never seen the movies, but he felt pretty upset that nobody had contacted him or congratulated him or had any interaction with him about any of the Bakshi or of the Lord of the Rings that came out in the aughts. And he said, I have more feelings on the business side of that than I do on the creative side. I'm glad Peter Jackson had a movie to look at. I never did. And certainly there's a lot to learn from watching any movie, both its mistakes and when it works. So he had a little easier time than I did and a lot better budget.
Got him.
So somebody's a little angry.
Yeah, now this shot right here that we're showing you, this was specifically cited by Peter Jackson in the commentary of Fellowship of the Ring as being one of the homage shots to Ralph Bakshi. So this shot was a salute to the 1978 Lord of the Rings film.
We will be pointing out a few other shots that look suspiciously similar, but of course there's always the possibility that they were just both following Tolkien's writing, which is very specific.
Right.
So we all remember what Bilbo looked like in the Hobbit animated Rankin and Bass cartoon. He looks a little bit different in this iteration. Whether you like the way he looks or not, I don't know. How many people really love Bilbo in this movie? No? No one? Okay. And then Gandalf, of course, has a couple of different looks in the new movie. One where he's sort of animated and one where he's clearly very, very rotoscoped.
Well, to be clear, on the left side of the slide, we're seeing the Gandalf from the 1977 original film on the top and bottom. And then what you're seeing on the top right are the fully rotoscope animated Gandalf from Bakshi's Lord of the Rings. And then on the lower right, you're seeing the Ralph Bakshi sort of just almost like cel-shaded footage of Gandalf when they filmed it live action. This is going to become more prevalent as the movie goes on. You're going to see more examples of this in the presentation. But there were actually like 2 different versions visually of most of the characters throughout this movie because of the different techniques employed to bring it to the screen.
This one is really interesting in the way that I feel like both of these examples are really close to each other and how creeped out I was while I was watching it. What's interesting to note is I've done some reading previously to this, and at this point of the movie they were actually supposed to run into Gandalf here, but Tolkien eventually changed it so that they ran into the Ringwraith. But I don't know if this is an homage or if this is just the only way you could have done this shot. Very effective.
So by the time they get to Bree, you're getting a really good example of animation right next to clearly very rotoscoped characters. So you've got kind of a jarring effect going on because you've got, Frodo on the top and you've got just characters in Bree at the bottom, and it's just kind of an interesting look.
I actually thought she had a skin condition before I realized she was wearing a shawl.
Yeah, this is that technique we were talking about where they didn't have the budget, it seems, or maybe it was a stylistic choice, I'm not sure, one or the other, to fully rotoscope every character that showed up on screen. So what they did was they did some special contrast work and shading with some of the background characters to give them an animated-ish look without having to fully realize certain characters. And it looks very similar to what they would do a few years later on Tron.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that I think at this time, this type of rotoscoping was probably kind of like 3D was for us in the 2000s, where everybody was trying it. It didn't always work, but when it did work, it was really cool. And this is an example, I think, of where they really got it right.
And I don't know if we figured this out from the Bakshi studying that we did on the filming of this movie, but I know that for Tron, they filmed everything in black and white, and then they rotoscope color over it. So if Bakshi filmed it in color and then tried to use contrasting developing in the color, that might have created the look it had versus,
from the shots I saw examples, it was black and white. But I don't know if that was a secondary camera person.
Right.
I didn't know if that was source.
So Aragorn has a really huge belt buckle for someone who isn't wearing pants.
He kind of looks like a human pilgrim hat.
Yeah, or Santa.
Or Santa.
Pantsless Santa.
Now
we've all seen him at the mall.
The guy who voiced Aragorn was John Hurt, who we all know from his illustrious career before his sad departure from this world a few years ago. But yeah, he went on to great fame and fortune after he did Aragorn.
All right, this one really gave me a start. This is a character we all know as Saruman, but for some reason when they made this movie, they were concerned that people wouldn't be able to tell him apart from the big bad, Sauron, even though it's spelled completely different. So they made the choice to cross out the S here and call him Aruman, except they didn't always pronounce it that way. Sometimes they would call him Arrowman or Arrowman.
Also, sometimes they still call him Saruman,
right?
Which adds to the confusion. Here's another example of some weird movement stuff going on. Also, I wanted to point out that Saruman in this movie is not Saruman the White or Saruman of multicolors or many colors. He's Saruman the Red, apparently. I don't know.
Did he really need a staff that big, though?
Size matters.
I don't know. That's a lot of rounds.
I don't know. After this point, they go to Weathertop, and they have this great shot which pans around the hobbits as they're holding their torches and they're being surrounded by the ringwraiths.
And one of the cool things about this that really got to me was this is extraordinarily hard when you're doing hand animation to do a perspective change smoothly. Nowadays you do it with a computer. I'm pretty sure they use live actors to get these perspective changes, but I had to, watching this without knowing everything about it, I was very impressed they were able to pull that off.
So I just have to bring this up as we go into the next slide because, this was a very expensive film to make because it was animated and it was over 2 hours long. And as we all know who've seen it, it doesn't finish The Lord of the Rings. It ends early. So what you're about to see raises a lot of questions for me when I was watching it as to why they couldn't get farther in the story.
Yeah, so after they leave Weathertop, they run to Rivendell while being chased by the ring race, which is a very dynamic, action-filled thing, except that it really, really isn't.
Go!
Run!
Is he asleep?
Do something!
It's like they're dancing around.
What is going on with that helmet?
And it just goes on like that.
It goes on for 5 minutes.
It's actually literally 4 minutes. I timed it. They just stand there and kind of shimmy around on their horses. I don't know.
And apparently the Wraith has telekinetic powers.
And here's the thing I want to make clear, because I know we haven't shown a clip of this, but the action in this movie is really good. Mm-hmm. Like when they are using their swords and they're fighting the orcs and the action is really well animated and it's extremely intense and it's very good. But then there are these moments in the film where it just grinds to an inexplicable halt and you're sitting there going, this was 4 minutes where you could have gotten us to the Entmoot or gotten us, to something else.
There is no Entmoot.
There's always an Entmoot.
So when we get to Rivendell, wow, this is a hot mic. When we get to Rivendell, we meet Elrond, but not this Elrond. We meet this Elrond.
Sort of the Bond villain, Elrond.
Yeah, he kind of looks like he could be your tax accountant. So we also get to meet Legolas, who...
Glorfindel.
Yeah, Legolas plays the Glorfindel role in this, or the
Arwen role.
Well, that was what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Glorfindel often gets cut and replaced with a more prominent character for the purposes of movie or TV storytelling. In this case, he got changed into Legolas, and Legolas is played by Anthony Daniels, who I don't have to tell you all, Dragon Con, who Anthony Daniels is, voice of C-3PO for those of you who don't know. If you're one of the people that didn't know, don't raise your hand, just walk out quietly.
You can stay.
You can stay, after the panel. But no, Anthony Daniels did this role, and this was right after he had come off of Star Wars. And it's funny because Mark Hamill also did a Bakshi movie soon after he did Star Wars. He did Wizards. So there's a kind of a connection there, which is cool.
So they leave Rivendell and they go to attempt the mountain pass, but of course they can't do that, so they have to go to the gate of Moria. And they make a little bit of a departure in this particular version because they decide to kill Bill for some reason. I
know.
It's really
never kill the horse.
Not even the books killed the horse.
No.
He found his way back to Rivendell.
Right.
I'm not really sure who did the interior decorating for Moria, but it seems like the Balrog decided to hire his own person to decorate once he moved in because it's really, really creepy and very, Geiger.
It seems like they fought some things that were far scarier than Sauron or the Balrog and then hung them up in Moria.
Yeah, Moria.
Moria!
Yeah, we were constantly debating that. So in here where they fight the cave troll, there's the big action sequence and everyone's doing their thing. And so Legolas gets out his bow and he starts to fight the cave troll. And so I just want to show you the difference between the hand animated and the rotoscoped. Can you spot the difference in the bow?
No, looks the same to me.
This is literally 4 seconds apart in the movie. So,
which I have to say, I really liked each of these styles for their own reasons. The jarring thing was that they kept switching between them. So.
Right. So then they come across
this super scary monster. Oh no! I mean, this right here, I know, again, they were trying to rotoscope and shade over a person in a costume. This guy was probably flying in on wires. He was probably wearing...
it was a butterfly.
He was wearing, grizzly bear boots, but it doesn't quite land, quote unquote.
Yeah, but there was a lot of artwork at the time that was a lot scarier than this.
Yeah, this is the Brothers Hildebrandt from 1977 depicting the Balrog fight. So back then, around the time that was contemporary with this movie, other artists were depicting the Balrog in this very effective way. It just has to come down, I think, to the live action component, making it very difficult to realize that effect in 1978. And so it ended up looking like High School Musical theater.
But I would say, to be fair, I think they were probably imitating this painting when they made that Balrog. Okay, don't laugh, but you can tell the difference when you look at the
Go back
book.
to the other slide real quick.
Come on.
No.
That
is not. That is a reverse manticore and a satyr put together.
Holding the Olympic torch.
With despair and sadness.
He's
know.
running the...
I'm just saying it gives me hope.
Good. So next we go to Lothlorien, as we all know, and in this particular case, it feels a lot more like Whoville.
It's a song about Gandalf, isn't it?
And some people said his belt buckle grew 3 sizes that day.
I don't know. But I do know that Galadriel's ring looks like she should be rainbow bright.
Or teaching you a life lesson.
That's right. She has a very different reaction, Galadriel does, when she's offered the Ring of Power in this version of the movie. It's the top image where she laughs, and it's almost like he just asked her on a date, and she's like, oh, no.
That's a little too real.
Yeah. This is another good example of an elf with short hair, which is just really weird looking to me.
The guy on the lower left.
Yeah, with the guy on the lower left.
The one that looks like Steve Martin.
Yeah. They also pronounce his name Celeborn instead of Celeborn, which is kind of weird, but...
Yeah, all the male elves, except for Legolas, from what I recall, have very short hair. Like Elrond has the short hair.
Very 70s hair, yeah. This is just an example of...
how the Argonath looks different in the Bakshi slightly versus the Jackson. Now, the fact is that both of them clearly were trying to get the Tolkien description correct.
Of course, then the party breaks, and Boromir, who looks weirdly like a Viking in this movie, I'm not really sure why they went that direction.
Also not wearing pants.
Yeah. I guess men don't wear pants in this universe.
Not in Gondor.
So,
nope.
I mean, you guys are all way overdressed.
This scene, I have to say, this scene right here is what stuck with me from when I saw it as a child on video cassette. When I rented that videotape from Xanadu Video Rentals in Nashville, Tennessee, this is the one that got me, because the precision of the animation here is what I was talking about. The arrows hitting Boromir, like they have real punch and impact, and they rotoscoped that. They actually shot a guy with arrows. He got an extra $50.
Yeah.
He couldn't spend it on anything.
It looks great though, and if you've never seen this movie, this version of Lord of the Rings is worth watching just for this action scene alone.
I want to say the documentary has some footage of the live action actor who looks a lot like this character, also not wearing pants.
They decided not to go with the white hand of Saruman or Ahriman or Arrowman.
That's
or whatever
because
you
it's
wanna call him.
Arrowman. I mean,
right.
That's why I picked that picture there.
Arrowman. Got it. So, Goblins, Orcs. This is Orcs in the current Bakshi movie that we're talking about. Up in the top left, we've got, of course, goblins from The Hobbit, which Tolkien in his own writing says are the same thing. It's debated online. What isn't debated online, I'll let you guys be the judge of that. So apparently Gandalf got hung up on his own cloak while twirling around in Fangorn Forest.
I hate when that happens. Get out of the shower, go in the living room.
Not really sure. It seems like maybe they rotoscoped it, but it was like an error on the actor's part or something. But anyway, Gimli, Legolas, and Aragorn come upon Gandalf, who is now Gandalf the White.
Nobody would have their hood up with a hat like that on.
And we see why, because,
I don't want my hat to get wet.
So it's at this point where he tells the story to them of what happened when the Balrog and he fell through the Moria and all the things that happened. And in this retelling, he has kind of a flashback of what the Balrog looked like. And we all remember what the Balrog looked like. And I think he's kind of making it a lot scarier in the retelling. Like, wow,
This
it was
is a literal
so
shot
big.
from the movie. This is what Gandalf told them he fought.
Yeah. That fish was this big.
So then they all ride to Theoden's castle, or whatever. Is it a castle?
It's a mead hall.
Okay. The Theoden's mead hall. And so they ride along, and they're riding, and Gandalf has his white cloak on.
Rotoscoped.
And then he walks in, and he's kind of got the gray-blue coat on again, which happened in the Peter Jackson. Like, that's normal. He puts that on to sort of be in disguise. And then he throws open the doors, and he walks out. He's already wearing the white.
He's a wizard.
He's a wizard, and that's true. He gets before Theoden, and Grima Wormtongue is there, who is in this version called Grima Wormtongue, and you've got Éowyn there standing next to him, and this is a close-up of Éowyn. She looks super familiar.
Yeah, it's like Bakshi only knew how to, in his mind, safely draw women a certain way, and so everything falls within these parameters. And so everybody just ends up looking like, Galadriel.
This one's a little uncomfortable.
I'm just going to leave this on for about 5 minutes.
I just have to say their animation of the eyebrow rubbing was really good.
I feel like it's early footage of Harvey Weinstein. Anyway, too soon? Okay.
Too late.
So Treebeard is the only character in the film who is not rotoscoped, but he does look like he's been working in the field with a wife-beater shirt on all day.
He's a tree farmer. I also really like the kind of happy clapping going on here. We've been doing this for weeks.
We've been doing this.
It's very Disney. That clapping to me is a very Disney kind of moment, and I also appreciate the fact that he's not rotoscoped over an actor. He's a fully realized animated character. And you can see in this one shot with Treebeard that, if Bakshi has the resources and he has the ability to bring on the staff, like with some of his other films like Fire and Ice, which actually that was rotoscope, but Wizards and certain other films, he can really pull off some amazing things that rival Disney.
And I always had so much respect for Treebeard. It would have been hard to impress me with a depiction of him. So
right.
Sure. So they go to deal with Saruman, and this is sort of it's dark. Araman, whatever, that guy, this guy right here. And the orcs that are in the audience there look a lot like Tusken Raiders. It's just kind of weird. I don't know.
And this is where I was talking about where, as the movie progresses, I don't know if it was something they planned to employ or if they were running into budget problems. But now you can see not only are they shading live actors, but they're also saying, you know what? Half the screen can just be a cardboard cutout that doesn't move.
Yeah.
We'll just have
and we'll put them right in the front. So
yeah,
you won't
right
notice
in the
them at
front.
all.
I mean, so you're sitting there going, wait, I think they're running out of money.
I just thought that was something really scary orcs did. Like right before they get you, they're
real
just like
still. I mean, while their boys are behind them, really like in
that's
motion.
That's Krishnek, man. He's throwing down. That's what he does.
So Gollum.
Oh yeah.
Gollum's head is very unfortunate looking, and it does look like he should be wearing a hat in public. That's all I'm saying. His voice oddly sounds like Ringo Starr. Go back and listen to it and tell me I'm wrong.
Hey, Frodo.
I wrote the song.
I've written the song.
Speaking of songs.
Right. The writers of Rohan are just these clearly
they're
European dudes with really dark hair naturally.
They're Italians.
Terrible.
No, they are. They're Italians.
Yeah, they're terrible blonde wigs.
Right.
And to me, it always just looks like Garth. Like.
Okay, so I wasn't going Garth with it. There was somebody else I couldn't think of. They were all over the radio, actually, back in the 90s. I couldn't stop seeing this guy.
Stop.
Could you play that again?
Yes,
really like
I
that
could,
song.
but I'm not going
See,
to.
I'm sensing the audience turning on us, so I'm going to leave.
Okay.
We just played Nickelback. Okay.
I think that's against the
So the
rules.
people that the Garths or the Nickelbacks are fighting are these dudes in gorilla masks. Is really the only way to say that. This is a lovely close-up of one.
And they weren't like this the whole movie either. It was
No,
later
they kind
on.
of progressed to that. It's almost like they lost their hoods and stuff, and this is what's under the hood. So
I'm telling you, they were running out of money. I'm telling
Yeah.
you. Because look at this guy right here on the upper left. He's like, hey, any of you other guys going to move?
yeah, this is the
maybe?
end of the big battle scene at Helm's Deep.
Helm's Deep, yeah.
Which we all remember as being, again, like Frodo riding to Rivendell, very dynamic, not at all. Like, this is literally what it looks like when you're watching the movie, like, and it's playing.
Well, at a certain point, when they first breach the walls, when the orcs first breach the walls, the action is very much like the scene with Boromir. It's high energy, it's kinetic. You got Aragorn fighting on the battlements, you got orcs going down, getting slashed and people falling off stuff and everything. I mean, it's very, very good. But then suddenly you hear the squeal of the brakes and you get shots like this, and it makes me wonder if they were just running out of money. And from what I understand,
Maybe cut the movies
a
shorter.
lot of these shots of the orcs, some of them are people they filmed, and some of them are actually from, was it a Russian movie?
It was a Russian movie from the 30s.
Right. They just rotoscoped over people from this Russian movie in the 30s that was a medieval battle to
Yep.
fill in the holes. So
So then Gandalf gets tired of waiting on everyone, so he just goes in and keeps it real.
I mean, I'm telling you, the battle scenes are actually really good when they're bringing their A game to the drafting table in the studio.
And Gandalf does that more than once. Like,
Yeah.
he's had enough of these guys.
Right.
Yeah. We leave Frodo and Sam along with Smeagol right as they're about to go up the stairs to Shelob's lair, but there's not a lot that happens after they leave the party, so it's kind of like every time it cuts to them, they're just walking. It's kind of like when you read the second half of The Two Towers. It's just sort of like, and we're walking some more, and we're walking some more. Then there's the end, and it is probably the most confusing part of all, because as we've talked about, this is not actually at the end of Return of the King, and everything is like right in the middle of the action. So Sauron has still not been fought, nothing's really happened, and everything's just sort of up in the air where we end this particular movie, and then this happens.
The forces of darkness were driven forever from the face of Middle-earth by the valiant friends of Frodo. As their gallant battle ended, so too ends the first great tale of the Lord of the Rings.
Spoiler alert?
He wanted to call the movie Part 1.
Right.
And the studio wouldn't let him because they felt like people wouldn't go into a Part 1 knowing there would be a Part 2. They felt like if we know there's not an ending, we're not going to go. He said, no, they will. He said it'll be false advertising if we don't tell them. They go in thinking it's a full story, and then they only get part of the story. He lost the battle on the title, and that's why this movie ends that way. It is a little jarring. Even as a kid, I remember going, this doesn't feel like the end of anything.
I don't know if Gandalf would throw his sword in the air like that either.
Yeah. So a lot of the backgrounds in this movie are very creepy, and if you sort of pay attention to them, they kind of look like you're watching Dune or something. Like, it's really, really dark and...
Yeah, one of the weird things I noticed, though, was, I don't know if you can see it, it is a little dark in the picture, but in the top one, if you look to the side of Frodo's head, I'm pretty sure that's Nicolas Cage. Carved as a statue.
Yeah.
Can you
In
see that?
Elrond's
I don't know if
house.
it's too dark.
Initially, Ralph Bakshi had wanted to use the music of Led Zeppelin in the film because, as we all probably know, Led Zeppelin, big Tolkien
Tolkien fans.
fans, and put a lot of their stuff in their work. I just wanted to make a suggestion. If they do a movie now and they want to keep an edgier vibe, they could use Amon Amarth because, that dude looks like Boromir.
He's even got the
And-
horn.
And of course, the band takes their name from the Sindarin name from Mount Doom, so they're very into Tolkien as well, and they're awesome. Just saying.
Was he just too fast on that hammer thing, or
Yeah.
he seemed to stop?
No, you didn't see that.
Okay.
So Fantasia, we all are familiar with, is almost as long as this movie, but not quite. So 9 minutes shy of being as long as Bakshi's Lord of the Rings. So at the time, the longest animated film made at that time.
Is that a Balrog?
Now, one of the holy grails of this for Lord of the Rings fans and for toy collectors are the Knickerbocker action figures from the Bakshi movie. They were out for a biscuit minute in 1978-79, and then after that they disappeared quickly. but they go for wild amounts of money now. This is one set that's been graded that's on eBay right now. It hasn't sold, however, when I look at it in the condition that it's in, I can't argue that might be a fair price by now for that kind of set. I mean, it might be.
Yeah, each figure is several $1,000s. So
right,
when you add them
carded,
all up,
yeah.
Yeah.
Is Aragorn still not wearing pants?
Aragorn is still not wearing pants, yes.
So now we have to talk about the Return of the King. And we talk about, like, the story just stopped in the last movie. There was supposed to be a part 2, but Bakshi and United Artists had an argument about money and apparently several other things, so Rankin Bass decided to just move in and make Return of the King. But lest you think that this movie is finishing off the story from the Bakshi movie, we're just here to save you from that misconception. So how many people in here have seen this movie? I'm sorry.
Quite a bit.
This movie came out in 1980, and again, it was a made-for-TV musical animated kids production. A lot of people think that this was supposed to be the final chapter of the Bakshi, just because of some marketing that came out at the time, but it is absolutely not. It's not related at all. And it aired on ABC in May of 1980. So.
Yeah, and it doesn't pick up where the Bakshi film leaves off, which makes it even more confusing. It starts at the end of Return of the King, essentially.
Yeah, it has this really weird framework where Bilbo and Frodo and everyone are back at Rivendell on Bilbo's and, of course, Frodo's birthday, having a birthday cake and remembering the times of, like, dealing with the ring and all of the stories that everyone went through. So let me just give you a little sample of what that was like.
We have brought with us someone who has written a ballad about the adventures of Frodo. The minstrel of Gondor.
Frodo of the 9 fingers and the ring of doom.
So right away, the tone is just right there with the last one we watched.
Yeah.
Right away, the tone of this whole movie is, man, Tolkien's awesome, man. Like, we gotta, like, talk about Frodo, man.
What about Sam? You know,
Yeah.
he
Well,
had
what about
dreams
Sam?
too.
So, as we all know in Return of the King, we sort of start off with Sam sort of trying to get Frodo out of the tower where he has been sort of absconded with after
Yeah,
being
it
attacked by the
starts after
spiders.
Shelob. It starts
Yeah.
with the Tower of Cirith Ungol.
Yes,
And
exactly.
and he's already captured. And Sam, like, finds the ring, and then he starts tripping about how he's going to be this powerful guy if he can get the ring and become this uber warrior. You know, he's going to do all kinds of, like, you know, monster kills, and then he's going to make the world a better place.
I
and
really
this,
like what he's done with the orc.
yeah, he
want
believes
that thing.
he believes he's going to turn the world into this, you know, Bob Ross paradise.
I don't have a problem with that.
No, I don't have a problem with that either. I'm
Happy
just saying
little
the movie's tone is very strange.
We go to Gondor, which looks like it's giving the middle finger to Sauron.
Or something.
Or something. I don't know. It's just really overt. I don't know. The orcs are all
pretty
camped
aggressive.
outside, and they're just kind of hanging out there. And inside we have Denethor, who's kind of mad and crazy, and Gandalf and Pippin are hanging out with him, and this guy Bob.
Yeah,
That's his buddy. Pippin gets a buddy who walks him around Gondor and tells him the passwords and gets him some beer. And they have a picnic.
his name is Dave. And Dave is a great guy. He's a mensch.
Yeah, I fired Dave. It's Bob.
We're going to cut back and forth because that's exactly what the movie does. So it immediately cuts back to...
The structure is a lot like these people are just sitting around a table and they're remembering each thing one at a time, and they're not always closely connected.
Right.
Yeah, and then every once in a while there's just a song about something. Feeling happy.
Now Sam has to go through these statues at Cirith Ungol to get to Frodo. He has to get past these guardians. Do they look familiar to you? I jumped out of my seat. I was like, my God, that's Chamberlain from Dark Crystal.
Remember Galadriel's ring in the last movie? This is the only part of this movie that feels like the last movie. And it's the disco look of
the vial, yeah.
that he holds up to try to get through the guardians at the gate.
And Sam is also really good. The ring, they don't really understand how the ring works in this script. They think that if you just grab it on the chain, that it suddenly makes you, like, powerful, like it's a Mario mushroom, like suddenly it's like "Brr, brr, brr," you know, and then everybody gets scared of you. And so Sam will grab it, and then he'll just glow, and he'll become this like very confident guy, and orcs are just like, oh my gosh!
Which is weird, because normally if someone sees the ring, they immediately want to take it away from you. Like, that's typically the reaction you get when someone sees the ring. So here's an example of what happens when, in this version.
And this is a signature move. Sam pulls this move like 3 times where he just coerces somebody into committing suicide. It's crazy.
It's pretty awesome, actually. So he makes it up to rescue Frodo, and I'm not really going to give you any context. I'm just going to let you make your own decisions, but it's just kind of an awkward scene.
Anything above? Yes, there is something. Frodo!
The thing about this is that this actually becomes a theme in the movie with one of the main musical numbers.
Sing along.
Where there's a whip, there's a way. Where there's a whip, there's a way. Where there's a whip. We don't want to go to war today, but the Lord of the Lashes says, nay, nay, nay.
So here's the deal.
Thank you.
At this point, we're getting toward the end of Return of the King, as the book had it. We have some of the key scenes from the book, including the mouth of Sauron, Aragorn wanting to go face down Sauron at the gates of Mordor. We also have the one depiction of his eye, which is such a big part of the book, but it's only very briefly touched upon in this adaptation. We also have the sequences where Theoden rides to Minas Tirith to save it from the invasion of Mordor's army. And we also even have Éowyn's saving of her father by killing the head of the Ringwraiths. I mean, that is in there. He did animate these. Rankin Bass did animate these sequences.
And of course we have Mount Doom, where Gollum, who looks a lot more like Gollum from the original Hobbit movie, of course, comes in and does his thing and blah, blah, blah. So we get to the end, and it's Return of the King.
And now you notice Faramir here in the left?
Yeah.
He's not a character in this movie. He never appears. He doesn't. I mean, that's his one appearance. We assume it's Faramir. I don't even recall him saying anything.
I think it's safe to say it's Faramir in the book after she has defeated the king, Ingmar or whatever, whoever that was. She spends time in the Houses of Healing with Faramir, and they kind of hit it off. So it's kind of a cool part of the book.
Right.
You get there.
But we have to assume it's Faramir here because there's no context for it.
It's an Easter egg for us who read it. That's all.
Read the book.
Yeah.
So wait, did we talk about the song?
Yeah, well, go ahead.
Oh, have we not talked about the song?
No, I mean, we don't have a copy
which
of the
one,
song.
Michael?
So Aragorn
There's
comes
so
into
many.
Aragorn comes into the city, and he's now the return of the king, right? And the song is this very awkward "Praise him with great praise." And I had PTSD back to Catholic school at that point. I was like,
Or Presbyterian school.
I was like, what's going on? I don't understand this. The Rankin Bass formula that they used in The Hobbit, they dialed it up to 12 for Return of the King. You know, Hobbit, it was some cool songs that you kind of remember that were in context with the larger story. Whereas in Return of the King, they're like, you know what? If we have to err on the side of songs or story, let's go with songs. And the story can just become this piecemeal thing.
So then they depart to the Grey Havens, and that's the end of that. The only other thing that we have to tell you about is, I assume you've all heard about how Amazon is going to be doing a new Lord of the Rings series, and they're going to center the first season on a young Aragorn, which I think is a really great idea because it worked out really well for Star Wars. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Oh, I can feel you throbbing with excitement.